Thumbelina. A fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen. There was once a woman who longed very much for a little child, but she didn't know where to get it from. Then she went to an old witch and said to her, "I would really like to have a little child. Won't you tell me where I can get this from?" "Yes, we want to get it over with," said the witch. "There you have a grain of barley. It's not at all the kind that grows in the farmer's field, or the kind that the chickens get to eat. Put it in a flower pot, and you'll be like that get to see something." "I thank you," said the woman, and gave the witch 5 groschen, then went home, planted the barley grain, and immediately a beautiful large flower grew there. It looked like a tulip, but the leaves closed tightly together, just as if they were still in bud. "That's a cute flower," said the woman, and kissed the red and yellow leaves, but just as she kissed them, the flower opened with a bang. It was a real tulip, as you could now see, but it sat in the middle of the flower. The green seed pen was a very small girl, fine and cute. She was not more than a thumb wide and long. That's why she was called Thumbelina. Thumbelina got a cute lacquered walnut shell for her cradle, violet petals were her mattress, and a rose petal was her comforter. She slept there at night, but during the day she played on the table where the woman had put a plate around which she placed a whole plate, had laid a wreath of flowers whose stems were in the water. There was a large tulip leaf floating here, and on this Thumbelina could sit and sail from one side of the plate to the other. She had 2 white horsehairs for rowing. That looked absolutely lovely. She could also sing, and so delicately and sweetly that one had never heard. One night, as she lay in her beautiful bed, a toad hopped in through a broken pane of the window. The toad was ugly, big and wet. It hopped straight down onto the table where Thumbelina was lying and sleeping under the red rose petal. "That would be a beautiful wife for my son," said the toad, and then she took the walnut shell in which Thumbelina was sleeping and hopped with it through the broken pane and down into the garden. A large, wide river flowed there. But especially on the bank, it was swampy and marshy. The toad lived here with her son. He was ugly and nasty and looked exactly like his mother. "Coax, coax, breckerekkekex." That was all he could say when he saw the cute little girl in the walnut shell. "Don't speak so loudly or she'll wake up," said the old toad. "She could still escape from us because she is as light as swan down. We want to put her out on one of the wide water lily leaves in the river. That is for her, who is so light and small, is just like an island. It cannot run away from there while we repair the stateroom down under the morass where you are supposed to live and dwell." Out in the river, there were many water lilies with broad green leaves that looked as if they were floating on top of the water. The leaf furthest out was also the largest. The old toad swam there and placed the walnut shell with Thumbelina on it. The little creature woke up early in the morning, and when it saw where it was, it began to cry bitterly. Because there was water on all sides of the big green leaf, and it couldn't get to land at all. Section, the old toad sat down in the mud and cleaned her room with reeds and yellow flowers. It should be pretty nice for the new daughter-in-law. Then she swam with the ugly son to the leaf where Thumbelina was standing. They wanted to fetch her pretty bed, which was to be placed in the bridal chamber before she entered it herself. The old toad bowed low to her in the water and said, "Here you see my son. He will be your husband, and you will live quite splendidly down in the swamp." "Coax, coax, breckerekkekex," was all the son could say. Then they took the cute little bed and swam away with it. But Thumbelina sat all alone and cried on the green leaf because she didn't want to live with the nasty toad or have her ugly son as a husband. The little fish that were swimming in the water below had certainly seen the toad, and they had also heard what she had said. That's why they stuck their heads out. They wanted to see the little girl. They found it very cute and were sorry that it should go down to the ugly toad. No, that should never happen. They gathered in the water below around the green stalk that held the leaf, gnawed off the stalk with their teeth, and then the leaf swam down the river with Thumbelina, far away where the toad couldn't reach them. Thumbelina sailed past many cities, and the little bird sat in the bushes, saw her, and sang, "What a lovely little girl." The leaf swam further and further away with her. So Thumbelina traveled beyond lands. A cute white butterfly always fluttered around her, and finally settled on the page because Thumbelina liked it. She was very pleased, for now the toad could not reach her, and it was so beautiful where she went. The sun shone on the water, which shone like pure gold. She took her belt, tied one end around the butterfly, and fastened the other end of the ribbon to the leaf. It slid away much faster, and she with it, because she was standing on it. Then a large May beetle flew up, saw her, immediately wrapped its claws around her slender body, and flew with her up a tree. The green leaf swam down the river, and the butterfly with it, because it was tied to the leaf, couldn't get away. How frightened poor Thumbelina was when the cockchafer flew up the tree with her. But mostly she was sad, because of the beautiful white butterfly that she had tied to the leaf. If it couldn't free itself, it would starve. The cockchafer didn't care about that. He sat down with her on the largest green leaf of the tree, gave her the sweet flowers to eat, and said that she was cute, although she didn't look anything like a cockchafer. Later, all the other cockchafers that lived in the tree came and visited her. They looked at Thumbelina, and the lady beetle raised her antennae and said, "She doesn't have more than 2 legs. That looks pitiful." "She has no antennae," said another. "She's so slim in the middle." "Ah, she looks like a human." "How ugly she is," said all the cockchafers, and yet Thumbelina was so cute. The cockchafer who stole her also recognized this, but when everyone else said she was ugly, he finally believed it too, and didn't want her at all. She could go wherever she wanted. They flew her down the tree and placed her on a daisy. Then she cried because she was so ugly that the cockchafers didn't want her, and yet she was the loveliest thing you could imagine, as fine and clear as the most beautiful rose petal. All summer, poor Thumbelina lived all alone in the big forest. She wove herself a bed of blades of grass and hung it under a burdock leaf, so she was protected from the rain. She picked the sweet flowers for food and drank the dew that lay on the leaves every morning. So summer and autumn passed. But now winter came, the cold, long winter. All the birds that had sung so beautifully before her flew away, trees and flowers withered. The large burdock leaf under which she had lived shriveled up, leaving nothing but a yellow, withered stalk. Thumbelina was terribly cold because her clothes were torn, and she was so delicate and small that she would freeze to death. It started to snow, and every snowflake that fell on them was like a whole shovelful being thrown at us, because we are tall, and it was only half a finger long. Then she wrapped herself in a withered leaf, but it would not warm her. She shivered from the cold. Close to the forest where she had now come, there was a large cornfield. The grain had long been cut off, only the bare, dry stubble stood out from the frozen earth. It was like a whole forest for her to wander through, and she was shivering with cold. Then she came to the door of the field mouse, which had a small hole under the grain stubble. The field mouse lived there warm and well, had the whole room full of grain, a wonderful kitchen and pantry. Poor Thumbelina stood in the door, just like any other poor begging girl, and asked for a small piece of a grain of barley, because she hadn't had anything to eat for 2 days. "You little creature," said the field mouse, because basically it was a good old field mouse. "Come into my warm room and eat with me." Since she now liked Thumbelina, she said, "You can stay with me over the winter, but you must keep my room clean and pure and tell me stories, because I love them very much." Thumbelina did what the good old field mouse asked, and had an extremely good time over the long winter period. "Now we'll have visitors soon," said the field mouse. "My neighbor visits me once a week. He looks even better than me, has large halls, and wears a beautiful black velvet fur coat. If you could get him as a husband, you would be good taken care of. But he can't see. When he's our guest, you have to tell him the cutest stories you know." But Thumbelina didn't care about that. She didn't like the neighbor because he was a mole. He came and paid the visit in his black velvet fur. He was rich and learned, said the field mouse. His apartment was also 20 times larger than that of the field mouse. He was learned, but he didn't like the sun and the beautiful flowers at all. He spoke badly of both because he had never seen them before. Thumbelina had to sing, and she sang "Cockchafer Fly" and "Who Wants to Be Among the Soldiers?" The mole fell in love with her because of her beautiful voice, but he said nothing. He was a level-headed man. He had recently dug a long passage through the earth from his house to hers. In this, the field mouse and Thumbelina were given permission to walk as much as they wanted. But he asked them not to be afraid of the dead bird that was lying in the corridor. It was a whole bird with feathers and a beak, which had certainly died recently and was now buried right where it had walked. The mole now took a piece of rotten wood in its mouth because it shimmers like fire in the dark, and went ahead and shone for them in the long dark corridor. When they came to where the dead bird lay, the mole pressed his broad nose against the ceiling and pushed up the earth so that there was a large hole and the light could shine through. In the middle of the floor lay a dead swallow, its beautiful wings pressed tightly to its side, its feet and head tucked under its feathers. The poor bird must have died from the cold. Thumbelina felt sorry for that. She thought a lot of all the little birds. They had sung and chirped so beautifully in front of her all summer. But the mole pushed him with his short legs and said, "Now he doesn't whistle anymore. It must be miserable to be born a little bird. Thank God that none of my children will be like that. Such a bird has nothing except its quivet, and must starve in the winter." "Yes, as a sensible man you can say that," replied the field mouse. "What good does the bird have for all his quivet when winter comes? Be distinguished." Thumbelina said nothing. But when the other two turned their backs on the bird, she bent down, pushed aside the feathers that covered its head, and kissed it on its closed eyes. "Perhaps it was he who sang so beautifully in front of me in the summer," she thought. "How much joy he didn't give me, the dear, beautiful bird." The mole then plugged the hole through which the day shone in, and then accompanied the ladies home. But Thumbelina couldn't sleep at night. Then she got up from her bed and wove a large, beautiful carpet out of hay. She carried it to the bird, spread it over him, and placed soft cotton, which she had found in the field mouse's room, on its sides so that it could lie warm in the cold earth. "Farewell, you beautiful little bird," she said. "Farewell, and thank you for your wonderful singing in the summer, when all the trees were green and the sun shone warmly down on us." Then she laid her head on the bird's chest, but at the same time she was frightened, because it was as if something was knocking inside. That was the bird's heart. The bird wasn't dead, it just lay there stunned, was now warmed up and came back to life. In autumn all the swallows fly away to warm countries, but if there is one that is late, it is so cold that it falls down as if dead and remains where it falls. And the cold snow covers them. Thumbelina trembled violently, she was so frightened, because the bird was big, very big compared to her. But she took courage, wrapped the cotton closer around the poor swallow, and fetched a spearmint leaf that she had used as a cover sheet, and placed it very carefully over the bird's head. The next night she crept back to him, and he was alive, but completely weak. He could only open his eyes for a moment and look at Thumbelina, who was standing in front of him with a piece of rotten wood in her hand, because she didn't have another lantern. "Thank you, you cute little child," said the sick swallow to her. "I have been wonderfully warmed up. Soon I will get my strength back and can fly around outside in the warm sunshine again." "Oh," said Thumbelina, "it's cold outside, it's snowing and freezing, stay in your warm bed, I'll take care of you." Then she brought the swallow water in a flower petal, and the swallow drank, and told her how she had torn one of her wings on a thorn bush, and therefore could not fly as quickly as the other swallows who had moved away, far away to the warm lands. That's how she ended up falling to earth. She didn't know anything else, nor how she got here. She stayed down there all winter. Thumbelina looked after her and loved her. Neither the mole nor the field mouse found out anything about it because they didn't like the poor swallow. As soon as spring came and the sun warmed the earth, the swallow said goodbye to Thumbelina, opening the hole made by the mole above. The sun shone beautifully on them, and the swallow asked if she wanted to come with them. She could sit on their back. They wanted to fly far into the green forest. But Thumbelina knew that it would sadden the old field mouse if she left her. "No, I can't," said Thumbelina. "Farewell, farewell, you good cute girl," said the swallow, and flew out into the sunshine. Thumbelina looked after her, and the water came into her eyes, because she was kind to the poor swallow from the bottom of her heart. "Quivet, quivet," sang the bird, and flew into the green forest. Thumbelina was quite sad. She wasn't given permission to go out into the warm sunshine. The grain that was sown in the field above the field mouse's house also grew high into the air. That was a very dense forest for the poor little girl. "Now you should sow your trousseau in the summer," said the field mouse to her. Because the neighbor, the boring mole in the black velvet fur, was courting her. "You must have both wool and linen, because you must not lack anything when you become the mole's wife." Thumbelina had to spin on the spindle, and the field mouse hired 4 caterpillars to weave for her day and night. The mole visited her every evening and always talked about how, when summer came to an end, the sun wouldn't shine as warmly for a long time. It would now burn the earth like a stone. Yes, when the summer is over, he wants to get married to Thumbelina. But she wasn't happy about it at all, because she didn't like the boring mole. Every morning when the sun rose, and every evening when it set, she would sneak out the door, and then when the wind parted the ears of corn so that she could see the blue sky, she would think of how bright and it was nice out here. And I longed to see the dear swallow again. But she didn't come back. She had certainly moved far away into the beautiful green forest. When autumn came, Thumbelina had her entire trousseau ready. "You're supposed to have your wedding in 4 weeks," said the field mouse. But Thumbelina cried and said she didn't want the boring mole. "Bells and whistles," said the field mouse. "Don't become unruly, otherwise I will bite you with my white teeth. It's a beautiful man you're getting, and you shouldn't forget that. The queen herself doesn't have a black one like that velvet fur. He has a full kitchen and basement. Thank God for him." Now they should have a wedding. The mole had already come to fetch Thumbelina. She should live with him, deep underground, never coming out into the warm sun, because he didn't like it. The poor child was very sad. She should now say goodbye to the beautiful sun, which she had been allowed to see from the door at the field mouse. "Farewell, you bright sun," she said, stretched her arms up high and walked a little further in front of the field mouse's house. For now the grain had been harvested, and here only the dry stubble stood. "Farewell, farewell," she said, and wrapped her arms around a small red flower that was standing there. "Say hello to the little swallow for me when you see her." "Quivet, quivet," it suddenly sounded above her head. She looked up. It was the little swallow that was just passing by. As soon as she saw Thumbelina, she became very happy. She told her how reluctant she was to have the ugly mole as her husband, and that she would then have to live deep underground where the sun never shines. She couldn't stop herself from crying. "Now the cold winter is coming," said the little swallow, belt tight. "Then we will fly away from the ugly mole and his dark room, far over the mountains, to the warm countries where the sun shines more beautifully than here, where it is always summer and there are wonderful flowers. Just fly with me, you dear little Thumbelina, who saved my life when I lay like dead in the dark cellar." "Yes, I'll come with you," said Thumbelina, and sat on the bird's back with her feet on its unfolded wings. She tied her belt to one of the strongest feathers, and then the swallow flew high into the air, over the forest and over the lake, high over the great mountains, wherever there is snow. Thumbelina froze in the cold air, but in it she hid under the bird's warm feathers, and only stuck out her little head to admire all the beauties below her. Then they came to the warm countries. The sun shone far clearer there than here. The sky was twice as high, and the most beautiful green and blue grapes grew on ditches and hedges. In the forests there were lemons and oranges. Here it smelled of myrtles and spearmint. On the country roads the cutest children ran and played with big, colorful butterflies. But the swallow flew further away, and it became more beautiful and more beautiful. Under the most beautiful green trees by the blue lake stood a dazzling white marble castle from ancient times. Vines climbed up around the high pillars. At the very top there were many swallows' nests, and in one lived the swallow that carried Thumbelina. "Here is my house," said the swallow. "But if you want to choose for yourself one of the most magnificent flowers that grows down there, then I will put you in it, and you shall have it as good and beautiful as you wish." "This is wonderful," said Thumbelina, and clapped her little hands happily. There was a large white marble pillar that had fallen to the ground and cracked into 3 pieces, but between these grew the most beautiful large white flowers. The swallow flew down with Thumbelina and placed her on one of the broad leaves. But how astonished she was! There sat a little man in the middle of the flower, so white and transparent, as if he were made of glass. He wore the cutest gold crown on his head and the most beautiful clear wings on his shoulders. He himself was no taller than Thumbelina. It was the flower elf. In every flower there lived a little man or woman, but this one was the king, over all. "God, how beautiful he is," whispered Thumbelina to the swallow. The little prince was very frightened by the swallow, for it was a gigantic bird compared to him, who was so small and delicate. But when he saw Thumbelina, he was delighted. She was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. That's why he took his gold crown from his head and placed it on her head, asked what her name was, and if she wanted to be his wife, then she should be queen of them all. There will be flowers. Yes, that was truly a different man than the son of the toad and the mole with the black velvet fur. So she said yes to the glorious prince, and from every flower came a lady or a gentleman so cute that it was a delight. Everyone brought Thumbelina a present, but the best of all were a pair of beautiful wings from a large white fly. They were attached to Thumbelina's back, and now she could fly from flower to flower. There was much joy, and the swallow sat up in its nest and sang to them as best it could. But in her heart she was sad, because she was fond of Thumbelina and would have liked to stay with her forever. She would have preferred to never part with her. "You shall not be called Thumbelina," the flower elf said to her. "That's an ugly name, and you're beautiful. We want to call you Maya from now on." "Farewell, farewell," said the little swallow, and flew away again from the warm countries, far away back to Germany. There she had a little nest above the window where the man who can tell fairy tales lives. In front of him she sang, "Quivet, quivet." Therefore we know the whole story.